My name's Kathy Merchant. I think I haven't gotten a name tag, but I think lots of you have met me already. So I'm the Minister of Community Life at Canadian Memorial United Church, and also the interfaith leader and founder of the Living Interfaith Sanctuary. So I'm ordained as an interfaith minister, and I'm here to talk about compassionate listening, which is something I've been teaching for 15 years now. And you'd think maybe one day I'll get good at it, but I don't know, we'll see. I'll keep practicing. So just a little bit about compassionate listening. The Compassionate Listening Project was started by Leah Green. She grew up in California and had gone on a kibbutz in Israel and Palestine back in I think it was the 1980s. And she realized that even though she was raised with progressive values, she was actually scared of Palestinians. And she realized that was not in keeping with her values. So she wanted to get to know Palestinians. And so she started seeking out relationships with them and getting to know them and spending more time with them. And in doing that work, she ended up meeting a Quaker activist, a peace activist named Jean Knudsen Hoffman, who had studied under the Vietnamese Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh. And Thich Nhat Hanh is actually the one who coined the term compassionate listening. And he says that that's how we have to really be there with each other. That it's this wonderful gift when we can just sit and listen compassionately. That's a way of practicing our spirituality and also just really being with and holding one another. And so Jean had studied with Thich Nhat Hanh, and Leah met her in Israel and Palestine. And at that time, Jean was doing this thing where she was traveling around and she was teaching these seminars on how do we listen to both the victims of torture and the perpetrators of torture, the torturers. And that was seen as extremely controversial because it's understood why it would be good to listen to people who had been victims. But the idea of also listening to the oppressors was quite countercultural. But Jean said, and this is a very Buddhist kind of thing, that if we really want to understand where people are coming from, what would make someone be an oppressor, what about the parts of us that are oppressing others, what about the shadow sides within us? We have to accept that we all have both of those within us. And there's actually a great quote. This is my very favorite quote, and we use it a lot in compassionate listening. It's from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who's Russian, and he says, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who's willing to destroy a piece of her own heart? So rather than saying, these are the bad guys, how do we shut them down? We're obviously the good guys. Obviously, I would always be a good guy. How do we understand within each of us we contain all of that and reach and kind of integrate all those parts within ourselves? And so compassionate listening is one way of doing that. So Leah and Jean started working together in 1990, and they founded the Compassionate Listening Project, which still functions today. The main focus in the beginning was teaching skills that they learned in their work with Israelis and Palestinians, and traveling around between the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel to kind of teach peacemaking skills. So how could we bring people together and set up dialogue circles? And so Leah she would do these as trips where she'd bring other people. She's done about 40 or so of these delegations. I met her in 2008 on a delegation. I was a participant at that time. And since then, I've basically been involved with compassionate listening since 2008. And it's okay, you can walk through, don't worry. Sorry, you're kind of held hostage here. It's all good. And so I ended up getting hired as the managing director of the project. So I started working for them in 2009, and I worked for them till 2012. And I'm a certified compassionate listening facilitator. There are about 40 of us right now who are certified. There are, I think, about 8 people currently in the stream to get certified. And in the beginning, everyone was really focused on Israel-Palestine. But since then, people from all over the world have become facilitators. And they've worked on lots of different conflicts in South Africa, in Ireland, with uniting Germans and Jews, in South America, some work in Venezuela and Guatemala now, in various parts of Africa. And and it just kind of continues, and using the same skills. And something I can tell you that I really love about compassionate listening is the same kind of stuff that happens in a global conflict, unfortunately also happens in our own lives, just with our family members, our spouses, our children, at work. I know all of you have perfect families and you've never noticed this, but I've noticed this in my life, that the same stuff. So sometimes it's a joke among facilitators. We're like, gosh, it's like Israel and Palestine in here, where it's just like a PTA meeting and you're like at each other's throats. So you can use any of the skills in this, both in a global level or on something like this, or just in your life with your partner. So I hope that's helpful. So that's a bit of a background on it. So there are different aspects of the teaching. So there's the introductory teaching, which is what this stuff on this trip is from. And then there's also 2 levels of the advanced training. I've done all of those, but today and in a couple days, we're just going to be doing the stuff from the first training. You can teach it. Sometimes I teach the whole thing in 2 days, which works well, but it's pretty intense. It starts out like really nice and heart-centered, and then it gets quite intense. So by the second half of the second day, people are like, oh my gosh, this is a lot. So my favorite way of teaching it is actually as this thing. So I divided the practices into 10 parts. And because I'm an interfaith minister and I like doing things like this, I combined each part with a different faith tradition. And so I took poems and practices and meditations from each different tradition and combined them with that part of the practice, with those exercises. And usually each one is a 2-hour thing. So total, it's a 20-hour thing that I do usually, and you're getting 2 hours total. So you're only getting like a small bit, but hopefully I try to pick out the part that would be the most useful for this. So usually, and the way it's done is our training is kind of scaffolded. So when it starts, it's really like, it's about how do we ground ourselves. So in the beginning, the first week is like working with Indigenous teachings. How do we maintain grounding? So when we're listening to people or we're in conflict, how can we stay in that open-hearted space without just shutting down or running away? The next week, working with Judaism and working with our triggers. And I highlighted these 2 because the practice today is going to come from some of that. So it's not all of that material, but it's some of it. And then the next week from Buddhism, how do we work with drama? I don't know if any of you have experienced drama in your life, but there are a few things we can do with drama. After that, Christianity, there's something called 3-part listening that we're going to get in 2 days. It's called the life raft of compassionate listening. And if you forget everything else, at least you'll remember this part. And this is super useful just by itself. And then with Sikhism, deepening questions, how do we go deeper into the story? And that's the other thing we're going to work on in the next set. In Hinduism, how do we have different perspectives and hold differing perspectives at the same time? In neo-paganism, how do we build connection with other people, no matter how different we are? From the Baha'i faith, how do we widen our perspectives to understand even the perspectives of our enemies in a given situation? From humanism, what's the science of compassion? What's actually going on when we're in that grounded state, and how can we impact people in that way? What's happening scientifically? And finally, it works up to Islam, from debate to speaking from the heart. And so this is the hardest one. And so usually, I was telling someone earlier that sometimes I get asked to teach just the first 5, and it stays really nice and heart-centered and sweet. And people think compassionate listening is just sweet. And then you get to the second half and you're like, oh no, this is actually really hard. And that's because each week gets a little harder, because we're really building up to what's it like when we're actively in debate with someone, and then how can we drop into that grounded, open-hearted space and even speak our own truth back to them while we're still in that space, and not in a way that we just want to annihilate them. So this is sort of what we're doing. I'm going to touch on one part of this in 2 days, so we'll kind of get a little bit from that, but today we're focusing on this. So usually, I don't know how well you can see these, I'm going to hold these up. So we're not going to have time to do a lot of small group sessions together, but because we usually break out into small groups, these are some of our agreements. And over time, we've added more, as the few that we had were clearly not enough. But these are the some that we work with. And I will be asking you, based on what we do just in this group, to go out and chat with each other outside of this. So remember these when you're with each other, and try not to get into a fist fight. So the ones that we try to do, try to participate fully, be open to it. Don't kind of just sit there in the corner, shut down. Take risks. It can get really kind of scary sometimes as we go into some of our triggers and things like this. Speak what has heart and meaning. You can really speak into that even if someone's really sharing kind of deeply. And that's part of why Jason and I were chatting. I feel very comfortable being on camera and having this recorded, and I do draw from my own experience. It's okay, you can totally walk through. But you're not going to be on camera, so don't worry about that part. Confidentiality ×2 is because if we're having a big group discussion, whatever's said in here should stay in here. But also, like if Sheila and I are meeting personally, and if I say, oh, I just had a fight with my partner, it was like this, it would be great if when we're in the big group, she's not like, well, Kathy was fighting with her partner. So maintain the confidentiality. So later on, if you're connecting with 1 or 2 people, whatever they share with you, don't tell everybody else. unless they explicitly give you permission for that. Permission to express strong emotions. Those do come up sometimes. I don't think they will in this setting, but you never know. So we got to be open to it, and that's totally fine. And we work with whatever's present. Trust each other. I think we're getting that over the course of this. Respecting and sharing time, kind of being aware that, like, if I'm the one who's always asking questions, make sure I'm giving other people time. And if I'm, chatting with someone else, am I taking equal time to listen to them? Suspending judgment as much as we can, and slow down to the speed of wisdom. And that's one of our core kind of things, especially if things will come up, someone's really heated. Because people will sometimes say things that are quite shocking. I had a session once where someone said, well, everyone in Gaza should be killed. I'm like, okay, let's slow down to the speed of wisdom. What are we going to do with that? Let's sit here. Let's figure out what to do with that. So people bring a lot of feelings. So I don't anticipate that here today. But again, if that happens, we can take a break and we can kind of figure out what to do together. So that's some of our agreements. So if you will, close your eyes for a moment. Just get centered. I have an opening poem for us. This is by Dorothy Hunt. And I think you'll appreciate this given what we're doing. It's called Peace is This Moment Without Judgment. Do you think peace requires an end to war? Or tigers eating only vegetables? Does peace require an absence from your boss, your spouse, yourself? Do you think peace will come to some other place than here? Some other time than now? Some other heart than yours? Peace is this moment without judgment. That's all. This moment in the heart space, when everything that is welcome. Peace is this moment without thinking it should be some other way, that you should feel some other thing, that your life should unfold according to your plans. Peace is this moment without judgment, this moment in the heart space where everything that is welcome. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So, in compassionate listening, we have 5 core practices. I'm going to bring them over here so I'm not going to mess up Jace. Right, Jace? So these are the core practices of compassionate listening. So everything we do relates to one or more of these. So cultivating compassion for ourselves and others. Developing the fair witness. So the fair witness, we sometimes call this going to the balcony. And so it's the part of us that even when we're in conflict, that can be in the conflict, and part of us knows, you know what? I think I'm just upset because I'm really hungry. Or you know what? I get that I'm upset at this person, but maybe I'm not being totally reasonable. Maybe there's more going on. Or you know what? Part of me is reacting to them, but there's a part of me that understands where they're coming from too. And so we really work on developing that. So we say it's kind of like there's the part of you that's the actor on the stage, or the actress that's in the situation, but then there's the other part of us that's looking down from the balcony. So how do we develop that and be able to go to that space? Respecting the self and others. So if you are in an abusive situation, get out of it. Don't use compassionate listening as a reason to kind of put up with abusive behavior and say, well, maybe I'm not listening to them well enough. So definitely you want to respect yourself and take good care of yourself. But also we can, even when someone is being really unreasonable, we can do things in a way that's still loving in our heart for ourselves and them, and say, you know what, you can't treat me that way anymore. And that is something that comes in the 5th practice especially. But yes, and also respecting them, even if you disagree very, very much, you can still have a lot of respect for the other person. Listening from the heart is kind of the main thing people think about when we're doing this. And it's really beautiful, and it's being in that grounded space when we're listening, even to folks who we really disagree with, but also speaking from the heart. People sometimes say, oh, I guess compassionate listening is just kind of endlessly receiving. And it's not. It's the hardest one. It's the reason that it's the one we do in week 10, because it actually takes all of them. But I will show you a little kind of cheat sheet we have for how to do it. But how do we also speak from the heart? And that means speaking in a way that we're not just trying to annihilate the other person and their perspective, still being in that beautiful heart space. Imagine how the Dalai Lama would speak if he had to say something difficult. He would still do it. He wouldn't just shut down. He's not a coward. But how would he do it? So those are our practices. So, and I can say, so what is compassionate listening? So it's several things. It's a personal process. Something I love about it is it really makes you go through stuff yourself, do a lot of personal development. Especially to teach, I have to be able to access the shadow side of myself. And you really, if you're not open to knowing that you have a shadow side, if you want to think like, no, I'm always really lovely and peaceful, I don't know what you're talking about, you're not going to be able to really go into it, you know? So I love that it makes you unearth that and integrate that. It's also a skill set. Sometimes folks say, is it like nonviolent communication or is it like some of these other things? It's great because it's similar, and use any of them. Like I said, like things that work in Israel, Palestine, work with your child, you know, work with your boss. So any of them, whatever one seems useful at the time, it's like if you have a tool kit, just get as many tools in there as you can. And so this can totally, and there are different things we learn that can be useful. And then you might say, I used every one of your compassionate listening things and this person was still awful. And I'm sorry, then we need totally different tools, or maybe you need a break from that person. I'm not sure. You know, so it can totally just use whatever, however it can be helpful in that way. It's also a spiritual practice because it's a training. How do we stay in that open-hearted space, you know, with other people, even when we're sitting in the fire is something we often call it. So when we're really in a difficult situation or people are really saying things that are quite challenging. For us in this room, we're going to be having a peace demonstration on Parliament Hill. And there are going to be people that don't like that. I got an email, which a couple people know about, from a rabbi who was unhappy that we were going on the peace train, and he had some words to say about it, and he had a lot of suspicion about it. So I was tasked with responding to him, and hopefully I did so in a good way. But how do we do that? So even we might think, oh, well, I'm just doing things that are really nice. No one's going to get mad. You'd be amazed what will make people mad. And so how do we still stay in that even when folks are upset? And it's also a healing gift for ourselves and others. It helps us grow our own perspective. It helps us learn, and it's a gift to them and to other people to really be heard. So this is the model. Are we all good so far?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, awesome. So this is the model of what we're doing. And so there's a lot going on here. So let me explain what this is. So if I was going to do it in real time, I did it ahead of time, but if I did it in real time, so the thing in the heart, the idea in compassionate listening is this is how we all start. So think about kids who are running around. So when we start out, we're really heart-centered, just automatically. So what kind of qualities do we have when we're born and when we're young people? We have a lot of joy and wonder, a lot of openness and honesty and playfulness, curiosity, trust. We can be simple-minded in a good way, have a lot of energy, and be really awake and alive. You know, and little kids can be jerks too. Like, I'm not saying they, you know, I have kids, I know how kids are. But really, we're really open-hearted. But then what we believe happens is the stuff around here in orange happens to us since we're young. And this is all the ways we get hurt. And so we get rejected and told we're stupid, and we experience violence. We might get cast out or shunned. We feel a lot of pain, and we experience judgment. And I don't even know what that word is, betrayal, hatred, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. And every time we get hurt, we condense our heart space more and more because we learn that it's not safe to be open-hearted because you get hurt. So we shut it down. So this heart, kind of like the Grinch, it starts out really big and then it gets smaller and smaller because it's not safe to be like that because we get hurt so much. So then what we do in response, instead of being in that heart space, is we build a castle. And this thing around here is the castle. I'm a very good artist, can't you tell?
It's good.
And
It's very good.
so what we do to protect ourselves is we might hate people back because they're mean to us. So why shouldn't we hate them? They hate us. And we might judge people. And suddenly we have a lot of biases and prejudice. We might become cynical and bitter and isolated. And we shut down our emotions. And we want to protect ourselves at all costs. And we harm ourselves. We practice escapism. We might get depressed and perfectionistic and anxious. Coping mechanism. You can totally come through. It's all good. And each time we do that for the sake of protecting this really beautiful heart-centered version of us. But the problem is then the version of us in the world is the castle version. And the castle version of us interacts with the castle version of the other people. And we think that's how they are. And that's where we're wrong. Because so then I meet someone. So then we're running around crashing into each other. So the castle version of us is interacting. And so we'll think that's how someone is. So I might say like, well, Bernie, I met Bernie. I don't know. She's standoffish. I don't know. Like, she's such a jerk. I don't know how she organized this thing. But it's because I don't know the real Bernie. I'm not experiencing this version. Maybe I'm experiencing the castle version. Or maybe she feels that same way about me because this is the version of me. So when we say in Buddhism, you know, may all beings be happy, may we be peaceful, at ease, may we be free to live and love fully, and may we love ourselves just the way we are. And you might say like, well, do I want Donald Trump to love himself just the way he is? Like, I don't know. Well, yes, because the way he is originally is this version. But then this is the version that we experience. And I'm not saying we don't try to stop people who we experience as being really harmful in the world. But I don't think, I had a Sufi teacher who said, it's not their personality. You don't have to love their personality. But all of us have this. So what we do in compassionate listening is we try to go back to this and operate from this as much as we can. And it's super scary because it means this stuff can happen to us again. So we're bypassing all the stuff we built to try to protect ourselves in the first place. But the amazing thing is when you do this, it invites other people to do this too. And it's basically de-escalating. So that's how we de-escalate conflicts, is we go back to this. And I can tell you that it really works. So I've been teaching for 15 years. Hi, bud. Yes. And so I'm often in this state, not always. If I didn't get coffee, if I didn't sleep well, I'm not, you know, and I have my own problems like anybody, but I'm often in this state. And I know that I'll like sit down on a bus and every time the person next to me is like, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I just feel like I can really open up to you. You know, my friend is a chaplain, my best friend. We were at a pub and she and I were sitting together having beers, totally just focused on each other. A girl comes over. I don't know why I'm opening up to you guys, but my boyfriend just broke up with me. I just feel like I can really talk to you. And that happens to me constantly. And the other people I know who are facilitators, it happens to them because we're in this space. Because inevitably, so many of us are like this, that there's a real craving for this. So I really love teaching compassionate listening because I have a vested interest in helping more of us be back in this, because I think it's healthier for all of us. And also then the more of us who are doing this, then people won't feel so starved for that. So this is really what the practice is about. This is what we're trying to get back into. All right, any questions yet? Good so far?
Oh,
You have a question? Yes.
be interrupting though, so you can talk
Okay.
about it later. But so what did you do when that comment came out of the blue that all the Palestinians should be wiped out?
Yes.
Remember?
Yes.
How did you handle that?
We did that with this, with deepening questions. So the question was, what do you do when someone says like, I want all Palestinians to be killed? What do you do with that? And what we try to do is we try to do 3-part listening, which we'll talk about more in the next session, which is where, how do you get to the values that the person holds and where are they coming from? What's happened to them with triggers and trauma that makes them feel that way? One of the questions we ask is, you know, that's really hard to hear. I'm wondering, did you always feel that way? Do you really think that's true for everybody? Was there ever a time in your life you didn't feel like that? What would it be like? Do you wonder if they might feel that way about you too? What do you think could happen? What would it take for us not to feel that way about each other?
Did they answer you?
This person did, and it got a little better. And they'd experienced trauma, and so their castle required lots of cannonballs and lots of destruction in order to protect their castle. And that's often true with trauma. So one of the first things we do is work with trauma, which I'm going to attempt to do today in the like 30 seconds I have. And to help people, because when we're in that traumatized state, we've been really hurt. So our castle is like enormous. So trying to do that. And also, how do we go deeper into where are they really coming from? And often, and especially I have to say, I find this really hard now that people can just be on YouTube watching videos that reinforce their prejudices for like 8 hours a day. I used to find this easier before because I could continue to meet with someone and really work with them. And now I feel like I spend like an hour with them and then they leave and they watch like 6 hours of things that reinforce their stereotypes. And so I find that really hard to overcome, and I don't have a good answer for that. But I do know that with the work we've done, I've gotten people who go from, I think every person in Gaza should be killed, to like, hey, we need to work together and I'm sorry I ever felt that way. And I have lots of stories of folks who've really changed. And they've gotten back to the heart. They shut down the castle. So that's really, but it takes a lot of work, and that's why we need lots of us, lots of training, and lots of us doing this kind of stuff. Yes. So, a question for you. So, who do you find it the hardest to listen to, or what kind of subject matter or manner? What do you think, especially in the context of this trip, what would be the hardest thing for you to hear?
You don't belong here.
No, you don't belong here. All right. Yeah. Others, feel free. You can popcorn out your answers.
Even just simple things like you're stupid.
You're stupid.
Yeah, this is a stupid idea what you're doing, or you look stupid.
You look stupid. This is a stupid idea.
Like when you're wearing
Right.
a mask, someone do that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Others?
Clearly don't understand.
You clearly don't understand. Right?
Political correctness has made it so we don't, that type of thing is often as we may have in the past. I think the people are it kind of, I mean, not all the time. But that's why people don't come up to me and say, well, you're ridiculous and stupid. They might think it, but they're kind enough not to say it.
So folks are kind enough not to say that kind of stuff. I'm from the US originally, where they might be less kind, and they might say that. And then working in the Middle East, they'll totally just yell in your face.
Maybe something like, how dare you talk about peace when people are suffering? So,
Right. Right. How dare you talk about peace when people are suffering so much? Well, and the feedback in this email we got is you say you want peace, but what are you doing to combat anti-Semitism right now? What are you doing to get Hamas to accept a ceasefire? What are you doing for the hostages? Like this kind of idea, like pie in the sky, or maybe you say you want peace, but do you really want to deal with any of the nitty gritty? Or do you want peace for all beings there? Or do you have a particular slant with the project you're doing? That was the sense I got. Is that fair? Because you read the email. Do you feel like that was fair from where they were coming from?
Concern mostly for one side of the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want peace, fix this side with no acknowledgement of the conflict. That's how. That's kind of the rough part. Is the lack of empathy or understanding of the other side. Yeah.
Right. And I can say, so at our kickoff dinner, we had 15 speakers from 6 different religions blessing us. And it took a lot to get all of them to come. Not all of them, some of them were like right there, but it was actually a lot of negotiating. I spent a lot of time trying to do that. So lots of compassionate listening, because there were folks that were very suspicious. So I wonder how many, with the same kind of like, well, what's your real ulterior motive? Like, surely no one's just like an old school hippie anymore who wants good things for everybody. Clearly you have some kind of an agenda. What's your agenda? And so two people, I had to meet with them multiple times to convince them to come. So I was actually super nervous during the event that they either wouldn't come at all or that they would like not be great during it. But it was actually great. But it was actually very anxiety producing. So yeah, it worked out really well. But yes, but it takes a lot. So that's some of the background. So specifically, so I kind of just went over some of this. How do we maintain grounding? We're going to touch back on that. Right now, let's talk a bit about triggers. So even saying triggers can be a triggering word for some people. So sometimes I've been in settings where I'm like, I'm just going to use a totally different term for this, losing balance. But really the idea, so if we really want to be with folks, especially who might have lots of different opinions, how can we listen to folks who are different from us without just getting triggered? Because when we get triggered, we lose balance and we don't stay open. And so the analogy, I'm not going to physically do it here because of the limits of the space, but if I'm teaching in person, what I usually do is I have some pieces of paper, and on one side it's blank, and that's the side that's up at first, and on the other side it has some words on it of some of my own triggers. And I put them on the ground, and then as I'm teaching, I'm kind of walking around, talking, and as I'm telling the story, sometimes I'm stepping on them and sometimes I'm not. So it's a lot like landmines. And remember, our work came out of like an actual war zone. So that's why we think of this as like inside of each of us. We kind of have that. So an example of this is, say I'm about to have dinner with my best friend, and she just bought a new car and she's super excited about her car. but I just lost my job and I haven't had a chance to tell her yet. So she starts talking first and she's like, oh, you know what? You're going to be so excited. Guess what? I just bought this beautiful new hybrid car, this electric car. I'm so psyched. I got a Tesla. It's amazing. It's like this. And the more she's telling me about it in a really like loving, open-hearted way, the more triggered I'm getting, because I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm so worried about my financial security. And you know what? She should know better. Like, what's the matter with her? Like, clearly she must know how I feel right now. And that's one of the things with landmines. The problem is you don't actually know where they are. And we often don't know what our own triggers are or what will set them off. So they're just below the surface. So the more she's trying to share in a really loving, connecting way, the more pissed off I'm getting. Because I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, I just can't even talk to you right now. And so that's why it's important for all of us to be aware of what are our triggers, what are the kind of things that set them off, what are the situations or the word choice or the language that people use. Well, like, okay, if I don't get enough sleep, if I don't eat, if I haven't been exercising, if I haven't been outside, if I didn't get, like, if I'm overwhelmed, too much people time, then it's going to be a lot harder for me to listen. And I'm going to have a lot less patience for this. So it can be really challenging. So some of our responses that we can go into, and I'm sure you all have heard of these, so some of our trauma responses, depending on how deep the trigger is we can have fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So basically in that setting, do I start arguing with her? Like, well, you know, Teslas aren't as great as you think they are anyway. You know, I know you think you're so great because you bought one, but guess what? Elon Musk is a jerk. You know, do I kind of go into this fight response? Or do I go in more of a like flee, like, you know what, I'm out of here. Like, I can't have this right now. I need to go home and like, you know, start applying for jobs. Do I just totally freeze and just basically sit there and just listen to her and not even know how to stop the conversation? Or there's fawn, and that's actually the one I tend to do the most. And that's the like the people pleasing kind of response. Like, oh, there's danger. How do I just like fix this so that it stops? You know, so then it's like, oh, okay, well, you sound really excited about your car. Yeah, that's great. No, sure, totally. I'd love to ride in it. Yeah, totally. Here, maybe, we need to get out of here. You know, that kind of thing where you're very anxious. And so which of those do you tend to go to? So these are things, I'm going to give you some questions that I want you to think about over the next day and then also tomorrow till I see you again. And feel free to journal or just think about them on your own. Which do you tend to go to? We usually have one, we go to more. And is it situational? So is it like, well, if I'm fighting with my parents, it's like this, but at work, it's like this. What's it like? And if someone were to really confront us when we're at the protest or like at the demonstration, what are we going to do? Are we going to kind of get in their face? Are we going to say, you know what, I'm out of here. Like, I can't handle this right now. Or, you know, what are we going to do? So we kind of are aware of that going in. And then also for the same reason, when you're doing that journaling or taking that time, think through what are some of your triggers, both in general and in this kind of situation. What are the kind of word choices that'll get you, or the kind of situations that'll cause you to get triggered? And so some of mine that come up, and these are the things, so in this exercise with the landmines, then I flip over the pieces of paper so you can see, and I think it's a great exercise for everybody to know what your triggers are. So some of my own, I have a friend who's a constant contrarian. So he's the type of person where if I'm like, oh, sorry, I'm late, there was a lot of traffic, he's like, no, there wasn't, it really wasn't bad today. Or if I'm like, yeah, you know, it was a great weekend, you know, it wasn't that good. I don't know, like this kind of, I'm like, oh, I can't even listen to you. Like, I just feel like always negated, you know, like, oh my goodness. So that's one of the things I find really challenging if someone's always like that, or I perceive them to always be like that. If someone does a lot of one-upmanship, so if you're like, you know, we just had this amazing trip across Canada, and they're like, oh, you know, that's great. You know, I did an even better trip a couple years ago. You know, where you're like, we just had this big demonstration. Oh, that's great. You know, I once went to a demonstration that's like this. And I find that really hard because I feel hard to like maintain connection when you feel like you're in competition, whether you want to be or not. Also, if someone's really aggressive, again, I have like a people pleaser kind of baseline. So I'll be like, oh no, scary person, must make them happy so they'll stop being scary. You know, so I kind of notice that. And sometimes teaching compassionate listening, that's useful. Other times less useful. Can lead to a lot of anxiety. So aggressiveness can be hard. Cruelty, I find really hard. I don't know, I really have a hard time understanding people that just want to be mean and that really just want to hurt others. and I can really shut down. I can feel really frozen inside when someone's like that. And I think there's also, and I know this is common in activist circles, I feel like there's a part of me that like just remembers all the really mean things that people have said, not even just to me, but just in general. There's like some horrible database in my head. And so it needs some protection from that kind of a thing, you know? And finally, people who are excessively negative. You probably figured I'm a fairly cheerful person in general. And if I experience someone as just like always like kind of this Eeyore kind of personality, like, well, the day isn't going that well, this, like, oh my God, I gotta go get away from this person. I can't handle this. So those are some of the things that I find that trigger me and make it hard for me to stay and really listen. So again, in the next 2 days, take some time to think through what are some things like this. You might have totally different ones. You might be the Eeyore, in which case I apologize in advance. So what are the sort of things that really get to you? And also we can think about two parts of it. One is often we have some kind of a personal history that caused us to have this particular reaction to this thing. Maybe we've been traumatized, maybe we had an abusive parent or a really bad or hostile situation. So you can think through some of that. And if you need to check in with me or you need to talk to someone, you know, then that's okay. I do a lot of pastoral care. So that's okay. I'm available for that. And but also we have our strong values, and values will be something that we talk about a lot in the next session. And often our triggers are kind of in opposition to our values. So like compassion is a big value of mine. So I think that's also one reason I find like cruelty really hard, because I'm like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? Why would you be like that? You know, we're like, I really love connection. So that kind of competitive energy. I'm like, oh, we can't have connection when it's like that, you know? So just think through what are some of your values around this? What are some of the stories you tell yourself around this? And what are some of those things? And what would it be like if any of those things came up on this trip on the way to Ottawa or once we're in Ottawa? So that's that part. I have one more part about what we do with triggers, but does anyone have any question about this part yet? So far, so good? Okay, awesome. So usually if I have more than like 20 minutes to teach this, we would break out in small groups and we'd share some of our triggers. So this is where you get a weird kind of bonding and a compassionate listening thing, because you're like, I just met you, but here's like this horrible thing that happened to me once and here's how I respond. But since we don't have time for that, you'll be journaling on some of those. So the next part is noticing in yourself when you do get triggered, what does it feel like? And so in the past, this is what folks have said has happened. And so kind of pay attention to this in yourself. So when folks get triggered, they notice, so here are some of the kind of things, and you might have totally different ones, but in your head or your mind, what goes on when you're triggered? So maybe your mind races, you get like a lot of thoughts suddenly, a lot of anxiety. You might disconnect, kind of dissociate. You might make up a story about it. I'm really good at this. Lots of ruminating, lots of like, oh my gosh, you know, and kind of spinning out and lots of stories about the situation or imagining what could happen. I love this one quote by Mark Twain. I've lived through many horrible things, some of which actually happened. So that's some of the stuff that can happen in your mind. So maybe think through what are the things that happen in your mind when you're triggered. With our emotions, what are the emotions that come up? So it might be anger. Again, if we have that fight response, we might feel totally overwhelmed. We just don't even know what to do. We might feel a lot of guilt or shame about it. Like, oh, I don't know, I was doing so well and now I'm like, you know, I can't even listen to this person, or like I can't even be here right now. I just want to go to sleep in my bunk or go hide. What's kind of going on with our emotions when we feel this way? With our spirit, what's our spirit like? We might feel disconnected from other people. Again, we might dissociate. Again, we might feel like we're guilty or bad or there's something wrong with us. We might feel depressed or deflated or kind of disillusioned with everything. We might feel alone, no longer connected to folks. And what's going on in our body? Do we notice we get really stiff? Maybe our heart rate starts speeding up, our heart's racing, our breathing changes, either speeding up or slowing down if we're kind of trying to keep it together. Might feel a tightness in our chest, a flush face and neck, kind of what's going on. So again, if we had more time in small groups, we'd kind of break out and share like what goes on here. And what are some of our actions? Like what do? Do we start yelling? or do we go into silence, avoidance? Like what kind of happens when we have this? So, and I hope it's comforting. I find it comforting that the kind of stuff that I do, as weird and unhelpful as it is, are the same things that all of us kind of do mostly. You know, like we might go in one way or the other, but these are the sort of things that I notice that happen to us when we get triggered like this. So then the next part is, what do we do about it? So rather than getting into a fist fight, what is our emergency plan? So here are some things that folks usually say help. So maybe separating and isolating from the experience, and it's totally fine. One of our agreements when we say like participate fully is like participate, but then if you say, okay, I need 5 minutes, like I gotta go walk around or something, or take some breaths or meditate, it's totally fine. So sometimes it's good to just take some time for yourself and recenter. Focusing on breathing. There's a reason that meditation does so much work with breathing that can really help us. I was at actually Sheila and I were both there on September 30th, and I love that one of the speakers said, let's try box breathing, where you breathe in for 4 beats, and then you hold it for 4 beats, and then you breathe out for 4 beats, and you hold that for 4 beats. And that really helps your parasympathetic nervous system kind of activate, so you feel more calm and you feel safe again. Because otherwise, physiologically, you're like, I'm not okay. So things like that, what you can do with your breathing can really help. Being present in the moment. So those of us who teach compassionate listening, especially if we've done so in a war zone, have often had a lot of really bad things happen. On my first delegation, there was a Palestinian family that was killed by Israeli settlers. And I have post-traumatic stress disorder because of that experience. The people I taught there with also have it because of that and other similar things, and we had a lot of really bad things happen. So I've done a lot of work on myself to try to work on how do you still lead, stuff like that, so you don't spin out into a flashback or something like that. And so one of the things, so I have a friend who also has PTSD and who does this kind of stuff. So he and I kind of have an agreement that we'll call each other, and I'll be like, hey, Justin, you available? I need some help. He's like, yeah, totally. And we kind of have a script we use where it's like, okay, where are you right now? Describe it to me. Okay, did you eat anything? Okay, tell me, where are your feet? Where are your hands? Are you holding anything? What's going on around you? Did you get any sleep? And it's really this kind of like, okay, rather than spinning out either into a flashback or a past story or anxiety, how do you kind of come back and just center? And my Israeli partner who I was working with on these trips, she and I luckily had different triggers that would cause our PTSD to surface, but we knew that about each other. So, and you can kind of see if someone like suddenly is really glassy-eyed,
Yes.
they can be in that, and I've seen that a lot. So then that's a lot of what I do. So I'll be like, is it okay if I touch you right now? So I'd be like, hey, is you doing okay? Hey, it's okay. All right, so I'm right here. What's going on? You know, you're safe. It's gonna be okay. And so how do you kind of bring the person back? And so you can kind of ask them these things. So it's good if you tend to if you do have trauma and you have a lot of triggers that kind of send you spiraling, it's good to have a buddy like this. Or if not, just to know for yourself, like, oh, it's happening again. Okay, how do I kind of come back into my body? You know, so these can be really good. We talked about taking a break, getting back into your body, going for a walk, being in nature, cuddling your pets, hugging your kids or your partner, doing yoga or stretching. Any of these things are really good for getting back into your body. Checking in with someone you trust, like my trauma buddy. There's this weird thing, EMDR, eye movement desensitization regulation. So I've done a lot of this. It's literally been life-saving. It is the weirdest thing. It's you meet with someone, and this is if you have a lot of trauma from something, where my therapist would say, okay, close your eyes, now describe like the thing that triggers you or like the situation. Okay, open your eyes. And then she's right there like this, and her hand's going this way, and you follow it with your eyes for about a minute, and then she stops and says, okay, close your eyes again, now where are you? And I don't quite get how it works, but there's something about a lateral movement that helps bring you back. So I used to say, like, one of my triggers was graffiti, because in this particular place where this family was killed, they'd spray painted on the door Star of David and then kill all Arabs in Hebrew. And so then I remember coming back, and I went to the grocery store and I went to use the washroom, and I shut the door and there was graffiti. And I immediately flashed back and had no idea where I was for like 20 minutes. And so that used to be something that would like send me spiraling. And so that would be one of the things, like, okay, rather, so it like used to put me on a, used to say like the world's worst roller coaster. But then doing EMDR, now I can get a situation where I'm like, I could be on the roller coaster, or I could just see it's graffiti. And I'm like, at first I'd be like, wait, I think it's just graffiti. I think I'm okay. And then it's like, I could choose not to go on the roller coaster. So if you do have trauma, if you do have this kind of stuff, this could be really good. If you don't need it, if you're like, I'm just on a train, why are you talking to me about serious trauma? There are small things we can still do that can help when we get triggered. So one thing, and it works the same way, there's a lot of these lateral things. So you can go like this. I'm sorry, I'm totally gonna mess up your microphone, Jace. Where you can go like this, and it's like this butterfly thing, and it works the same way, where your body feels safe. Kind of like if you imagine a kid getting rocked back and forth. I actually find the train really comforting because you're like doing this the whole time. If you're in a meeting and your boss is yelling at you, or you have a lot of anxiety, on your lap, you can have your hands kind of going like this on your lap. There's a cool thing where your feet are on the ground, and if you feel scared, you can lift up your heels and your body thinks you're leaving. So I know, it's so cool. So your body is like, oh, you're cool, you're leaving, you're totally fine. Or you can even look like you're stretching your back, but it's actually that your body is like, look, we're looking for exits. Everything's okay, it's safe to look for exits. I have a facilitator friend who says you can zip up. So like maybe before we get on Parliament Hill, if we anticipate some kind of a counter protest or something, you can say like, it's okay, we're gonna zip up and we're gonna be safe in this space. And now we're gonna have the experience and we're safe. And then when we're done, okay, we're gonna unzip. And she always tells me if I say, I'm gonna have this intense meeting, I'm scared. She's like, no, you zip up beforehand, you'll be fine. And then if you're kind of faced with someone with a lot of intensity or something that might trigger you, you can kind of turn a little bit. So and it's like this Aikido thing where like the energy goes past you. So rather than receiving it, or with your legs, you can sit, you can kind of do this. And I do this a lot, and it kind of blocks the energy so you feel safe. So these are things that make your body feel safe. So if you're saying like, okay, so what am I journaling about? What are some of your triggers? What are the kind of things that bring them up? What do you do when you get triggered? Where do you think these things come from? And then what is your emergency plan? What are the things you can do? So you say, okay, if I'm in a situation where someone says, well, you're so naive, you don't even know what you're talking about, then I start to feel anxious, I start to feel this way. So what can I do? Well, maybe beforehand, I'm gonna zip up, or I'm gonna call a friend, or I'm gonna connect with somebody on this train beforehand, so we kind of have a plan. So these are some of the things we can do so we can stay grounded. And it's all, how do we come back? How do we maintain grounding, even when we're triggered? Yeah. So we can still be in that space. And that's because if you don't have that grounding, you can't go to the Middle East and try to teach them how to listen to each other. If you yourself are just a ball of anxiety, you know, it's not, don't do that. So how do we work on our grounding? And so hopefully all of this helps with that. So that's what I have.
So
and I think that was about an hour.
Doing more grounding.
Our next session is going to be in 2 days. So tomorrow I'm going to share the same thing with the other half of our group. And then in 2 days, we're going to talk about 3-part listening. So now that we hopefully feel a little more grounded and a little more prepared, how can we listen in a deeper way? And then start asking questions in a deeper way to really understand where the other person's coming from, remembering that they have the heart version of them. Even if they're acting like the mean castle version of them, that somewhere in there is the heart version. And at the end, I'm going to give you something that's we're not remotely prepared for, but just it's useful even if you just have it, which is kind of our script of if you have to say something hard, if you have to have a hard conversation, what are the pieces that you can go in with that can help you? And that can serve us in our conversations with lawmakers, kind of like, okay, here, let's try to do this. Yes.
I love this, and I would love to try and anchor and remember that series of things you said about grounding. And so I'm actually thinking if I could just do it quickly and do the movements you're talking about, I will remember better.
Oh, totally.
So I just
totally
wondered if that
would that be helpful? And then okay, perfect.
Yeah,
so some of the things, and I use these a lot, I think Jen has seen me use these exact things. So one of the things is this butterfly thing. So you can do this. So it's this back and forth. You can, if you're sitting, you can have your hands on your legs. It's the same thing. I don't know, there's something about the rocking. You can sit like this, which blocks the energy. If you're worried, it helps you feel safer. You can turn to the side a little bit so that the person's energy isn't coming right at you. It's kind of going past you.
It also makes you less threatening too, because that was a thing I learned
Oh.
back in nursing school. It makes you less confrontational to that other person.
Oh,
They feel like you're listening and you're a more gentle person when you do that.
that's a good idea.
So,
That's great. So it's that one. What did we do? So we did this one. Oh, the feet. I love the feet. It's such a funny one with your feet. So you're basically doing this. So your body thinks you're leaving. So you're safe. You can turn and it looks like you're stretching, but you're actually, your body is like, oh, we're okay. We can see that there are lots of exits. And yes, I think, was that all the ones?
zip.
And you can zip up and zip up to protect yourself.
We always say shields up.
Shields up. I love that. Shields up.
Yeah.
Yes. And then at the end, remember to unzip, because otherwise it won't work the same on your, otherwise you're like, well, that was a fake thing.
Because it eventually will wear off. But if you unzip, then you're really making.
Then you're like, it was a real thing that I did. So
Thank you for that.
that's what I have. Hope
you.
that was good.
Yes, it was.
Right. Thank you. I never taught in a train before. It's so fun. So thank you.
Oh, and the train stops.
How did I stop? Perfect.
Just like-